Thank you, Jeremy, and Sabaidi, to everyone. I hope you're rested and fresh for today, because you showed us how dedicated you were yesterday with 2 sessions, or with 2 PPD. So we decided to have 3 PPD, to raise the stakes today. So we are going to focus, as Jeremy said, on 3 different chapters of the RCEP agreement. This morning, we're going to focus on the e-commerce chapter, and then beginning afternoon on the trade in services chapter, and finally on the investment chapter. So I'd like also to welcome the participant joining us online today. I hope we still have a sizable amount of people joining us online, as well as our new interpreter. Welcome to this day 2. So, as Jeremy said, e-commerce is definitely one of the most dynamic sectors in the region, and hopefully today we will learn that this applies as well to Lao PDR. We know in Laos that in the recent years there have been a number of developments on the e-commerce front, from the e-commerce decree, I think it was in 2021, to the digital signature, electronic signature, current work on the electronic transactions law amendment, number of players coming here. We have Foodpanda, for instance, today joining us, one of the key players in the region, if not in the world, on e-commerce delivery. So things are changing, things are happening, QR code as well for payments. And that chapter, it has a very important meaning as well for Deborah and for myself, because we were both involved in preparing the work plan for the implementation of the Asean e-commerce agreement, a very important agreement, and I hope we will learn today a bit about the progress in terms of implementation of this agreement. And I had a chance last year to work with the MOIC on the work plan for the implementation of the RCEP provisions on e-commerce. So there is a work plan validated by the MOIC on the implementation of this chapter 12 of the agreement, with a number of, say, far-reaching actions from different stakeholders, public sector, but also private sector. So we hope we will hear a bit more about this today. And for this, we will have one representative from the MOIC who is working on this, I would not say day and night, but at least every day, to tell us a bit more where we are with this work plan, and more broadly, with the development of e-commerce in Lao PDR. So for this dialogue number 3, as yesterday, we have 2 sessions. The first sessions on the provisions of the RCEP agreement, this time on e-commerce, what it is, what's in the agreement, what's in the chapter, what it means for businesses. And for this, we will have the pleasure to have Deborah again, Deborah Elms, the founder and CEO of the Asian Trade Center. And we also have the pleasure of the presence of Souchitta SRITTHIRATH. He's the Deputy Director in the Department of Foreign Trade Policy at the MOIC. This will be our first session. Of course, this will be followed by a number of questions from the audience. And you know the rule, no question, no lunch. So I hope we'll have a few questions from you. After that, we'll have a coffee break, 15-minute coffee break, and then we will go into session 2, and we have 2 speakers from Laos. We have Mr. Tanoson Ponamat, Vice President of the LNCCI, and we have Ms. Tanyalat Chandansuk, who is the Managing Director of Foodpanda Laos. And again, we'll have a series of questions and answers from our panel, and then the main takeaways. Here's my name, but I think we all agree that Jeremy did a much better job at providing summaries and takeaways and incentives for us to join the next session in the afternoon. So maybe we'll ask Jeremy to repeat his takeaways. Well, with this, I hope that you're all ready for this morning session. I will introduce the agenda for session for PPD 4 and PPD 5 later today in the afternoon. So I would like to invite Deborah and Miss Souchitta? No. Our representative from the Ministry of Industry and Commerce to please come to the front together. Yeah, we're going to have a different procedure today. Can you come to the front? Take comfortable chairs so I can introduce you, and then we'll hear your presentation. So for those of you who were not here yesterday, allow me to introduce Dr. Deborah Elms, who is the founder and executive director of the Asean, ASIAN Trade Center. The Asian Trade Center works with governments, companies to design better trade policy for the region. And Dr. Elms is also a president of the Asia Business Trade Associations based in Singapore. We also have Ms. Souchitta SRITTHIRATH, who is the Deputy Director of Technical Cooperation and E-Commerce Division at the Foreign Trade Policy Department of the Ministry of Industry and Commerce. Ms. Souchitta is working for the Department of Foreign Trade Policy since July 2007. Prior to her current position, she was working in the Office of Multilateral Trade Policy Division, Bilateral Trade Policy Division, and General Affairs Division and Rules and Compliance Division. She made great contributions to negotiation in border trade agreement between Laos and China, CLV trade agreement, and the RCEP agreement, in particular to the e-commerce chapter. And prior to joining the Technical Cooperation and E-commerce Division, Ms. SRITTHIRATH has served as the Deputy Director for the division, and she directly worked for electronic commerce and also joined trade negotiations on e-commerce in different agreements, ASEAN, ACCEC, ANZ, FTA, CEC, and the preparation to negotiate the chapter of e-commerce in the ACA FTA. So we have experts to take us through the contents of the chapter on e-commerce in the RCEP agreement. And I'd like to invite Dr. Deborah Elms to take the floor. Take us through your presentations. It was a short rest. Take us through your presentations, as you beautifully did yesterday. And I'm told that we have a clicker today. Let's try that.
You gotta get my slides up first. No, it's I mean, I can start talking.
Oh, this guy should be coming. Yeah, so let's try that. Yeah, so the next one is this.
Check that out. Yay.
Next.
Fantastic. Thank you again so much. I'm so happy to see this many people here this morning to learn more about the RCEP agreement. And again, I'm delighted. Hopefully you're finding this useful since you get so much of me. So I'm going to talk today about the chapter in this agreement, which should have been the most exciting, and sadly is not the most exciting chapter in this RCEP agreement. So while I can be excited and enthusiastic about much of this agreement, this particular chapter is a missed opportunity, in my view, and I'll explain why. The good news, in my view as well, is that we have alternatives. So you don't have to have the RCEP e-commerce chapter to be successful in digital trade. There are other ways to achieve this. Okay, so let me, well, how did you make it work, Sven? It's this one, right? You did something and it worked fine. Oh, it's just slow? That's what I pushed. Okay, all right, so as all of you certainly know, we have had the impact of COVID in particular that has driven an awful lot of companies into the digital space in ways that we did not see prior to COVID. So firms that went online in whole or in part, outperformed companies that stayed offline across this last few years of COVID. It doesn't mean, let's be clear, that we are finished with the offline space. And I think all of you here is testimony to the desire that we all have to be in groups, to be with other people, to see each other face to face. The same thing is true for all kinds of activities. Many of you would not buy things without feeling them, touching them. We were discussing last night the skirts, and the fact that when you take a picture of many of these designs, you don't see the sheen of the silk, and it's very hard for you sometimes in a photo to be able to tell quality. But when you see it in person, like her skirt, which I think is exquisite, you can tell that this is done by a master craftsperson. And so you still want to be in person to buy some things. So we will continue to have offline experiences, shopping, restaurants, conferences, etc. But there will increasingly be a digital element to most of what we do. In order to make that happen, though, we need to have an encouraging policy environment. Because if the policies that support digital trade are a problem, then firms cannot go online. And if they go online, they cannot buy and sell goods and services in the way that they normally would. And so you need to make sure that government focus is on not doing everything for companies, but making sure that some key elements of policy facilitate trade and particularly, in my view, support smaller businesses. And newer trade agreements are increasingly focusing on some of the parts that make trade easier for digitally connected companies in both goods and services. So we have, in the past, had digital trade and e-commerce. E-commerce usually in the real world means you buy a good and it comes to your house, you buy a good as a company and it comes to you. Digital trade includes services. In the trade space, though, we call everything e-commerce. Anything digital gets called e-commerce. In the past, we had very few rules that governed e-commerce and digital trade. So we had lots of explosion of growth in digital. Almost all of you I see here are on a phone or a laptop or both. So, you are used to doing things online. And in the past, we had no rules. Anything happened. Now that's a problem actually even for companies, because no rules means that anything can happen. That's actually very uncomfortable for companies because it's high risk if there's no rules at all. So increasingly now, governments are imposing rules and regulations around various aspects of digital. And the big problem that is looming is incompatible, inconsistent, fragmented digital rules. So if we have rules that are at opposite purposes from one another, this is especially hard for smaller firms. Big firms can handle complexity. Google has a bazillion people. They can spend as much money as it takes and put hundreds of people to work solving a problem of incompatible regulations. But your small business has maybe one person in charge of everything digital. That person cannot handle inconsistent, fragmented rules on everything from data privacy, personal privacy protection, to payment space, to marketing and online presence. It's too much to do anyways. And then when it's different in different markets, it is a real problem for companies, especially small ones. So what we like is to have some key principles, some key policies that are consistent, that are anchored in a trade agreement as a way to ensure that some basic elements are the same in multiple markets. So we have been doing this in lots of ways, and I'll just mention a few of them here. Way back in 2010, which in the digital space is way back. SRITTIRATH, with Australia, New Zealand, and Asean, had an e-commerce chapter. So back in 2010, we already saw the beginnings of an attempt to make similar kinds of policies. That SRITTIRATH agreement is being upgraded right now, and the upgrade is due to be announced next month. Hopefully, part of that upgrade will be good digital rules. We have lots of other initiatives in different kinds of agreements. And Sven mentioned already the ASEAN work. ASEAN had an e-commerce agreement that came into force in 2018 that is now supposed to be implemented through a really excellent work plan. But the work in the work plan has not delivered as it should have. The work plan has lots of very specific activities. Those are missing, and when Lao takes over in ASEAN, please implement that work plan, because it had lots of great ideas developed in consultation with all of the ASEAN members, extensive consultations with all of the ASEAN members, to ensure that the work plan was acceptable to all of the ASEAN members. So it's important to not just have a plan, but to implement the plan. There is some work at the global level happening in digital through what is called the Joint Sector Initiative, but that has been very difficult to conclude and has taken an incredibly long time, and not every member is in that. There are some other new initiatives, and I will just mention before I finish this section. There are increasingly some digital-only agreements, particularly led out of Singapore, to have digital-only agreements that are separate from or attached to a trade agreement. So we have lots of activity on digital trade. And in that space, you might have thought that RCEP, 15 governments in Asia, could have helped harmonize design consistent approaches to digital. Unfortunately, it didn't, in part because the digital or e-commerce chapter is only one part of what matters to companies in the digital space. So we care about some of the things that are in an e-commerce chapter, like a commitment to move to paperless trade wherever possible. And we heard yesterday afternoon some of the challenges that many of your firms have faced in different paper requirements, different kinds of paper requirements and documentation that has to be delivered in person and chopped. So the goal in many of these trade agreements, including in RCEP and in ASEAN, is to move to paperless trade wherever possible, to allow electronic submissions of documents. But in order to have electronic submissions of documents, you have to have an approval of electronic transmissions in law, because you can't submit a document if the legal process doesn't support the submission of an electronic version of a piece of paper. So that has been challenging for many governments to implement. You also need, and we certainly saw this in COVID, you need to have electronic signatures recognized as legally valid. Otherwise, you need a wet signature with a pen, potentially a chop. And so we could have a whole document that is online, but if we have to print it, sign it, scan it, send it back with the original, we don't have an online version of the document. So, getting some of these basics around digital documentation in place is extremely important. And certainly in COVID, we saw how it matters to companies to have all of that online as much as possible as an option. We also, and this I think is very important, have services that are increasingly delivered digitally. And I'm delighted that we are having Food Panda after this, because that is an example of a service that is increasingly important for many people to deliver physical goods, in this case lunch, to someone for them to eat. So that's a digital service. That is not typically in a trade chapter, in the e-commerce chapter. It's captured in the services chapter. But it is very important for officials to remember that the e-commerce chapter is not the only thing that matters to companies, and digital services commitments are vitally important. Also, rules on telecommunications, the infrastructure behind mobile and internet, is a separate chapter in the trade space, but it matters obviously to digital, as does financial services. Now, we tend to be in Asia very protectionist of financial services. We all like our local banks. We all do what we can to make sure our local banks have our market as a captive. But that is a major problem for digital trade, where you need to be paid for your goods and services, or you can't deliver goods and services. No one can engage in cross-border trade if you can't get paid. So we must think about digital payments, electronic payments, cross-border, not just domestic, but cross-border implementation of payments, or firms cannot do business. If it takes you 3 weeks to get money transferred to your account, and it costs you a lot of money to have that transfer fees and penalties and who knows what, you can't do digital trade. So we must think about payments in this space and not put it in a financial services chapter and leave it. There are also some sectors that matter a lot for digital, or that have specific rules around digital that may need to be reflected in a trade agreement. And we also need to think about intellectual property rights in the digital space. The last time that we made digital rules at the last time we made rules at the global level was 1995. In 1995, the world, those of you who are old will remember, in 1995, the World Wide Web, www. became a public entity. So at the time when the internet was just becoming a thing, is the last time that we made global trade rules. So we have no rules right now that govern anything related to digital. So that means that we need to think about lots of things, including intellectual property rights. So many of you, in fact, I can say, because I made these slides, that photo is actually illegal. I took it from Google Images and I stuck it in here. I don't own the rights to that photo. So I stuck the photo on the slide. That's actually illegal, and it should be illegal because it's not my photo. But there it is. And I'm sure you all do the same thing. You are all copying and pasting and snipping and moving digital information and digital files without worrying about who owns the image, the file, the rights, the brand, the trademark. And so we need to think about how those rules apply in the digital space and make new rules that fit today's environment. Why is it only so? There it goes. Whoops, now it went too far. Okay, so we need to think very hard about lots of things as we design digital trade policies. It's goods, it's services, it's data, it's financial services, it's intellectual property rights. But in a trade agreement, we say, here's a chapter, we call it e-commerce, we put stuff in there and everyone says done. So it's super important when we look at a trade agreement to not just look at that chapter called e-commerce, because some of what matters to companies is not that chapter. So Food Panda, as an example, cares about the e-commerce chapter and electronic, some of the electronic issues around probably data flows, data privacy, because that matters. But they also care a lot about ensuring that digital services are allowed to move and allowed to move cross-border, because Food Panda is not a Lao company. I mean, the version here might be, but the brand is larger. So we need services in general to include digital services, digitally delivered services. We need the payment system to work so that if I have Food Panda on my phone from Singapore, I should be able to order Food Panda from here and potentially use my Food Panda wallet from Singapore to pay for an order from here. That's what we would like to see, yes, but the rules often make that difficult. So there are a lot of things that are included in here, and it needs to be considered across the board from all of the officials who are working on trade, not just the people who are talking about e-commerce. And the goal should be to allow a small company to become a micro multinational. So you could be the weaver of that skirt, and you could find a global audience for that fabric and those skirts. And that is the goal. So if you think about that, how do we make sure that every micro multinational has access to global markets? Then we would create much better agreements. Now, one would have thought that RCEP would have been a great place to anchor many of these digital trade rules. And I personally went to rounds, 17 of them, for RCEP, starting in 2014, to urge officials to be ambitious on this topic. Because we said very early that if you want to create trade in this region, you have to allow digital trade to flow easily. So 17 rounds of RCEP, less exciting. It's disappointing, to say the least, but fortunately, ASEAN has done a better job. So this is one area where the ASEAN agreements, I think, are better than the RCEP agreements, including the ASEAN e-commerce agreement. And ASEAN has a commitment to do a new digital framework in 2025. So in fact, in Lao's chair year for ASEAN, I assume there will be a lot of work getting ready for that digital framework from 2025. So you are in a good position to help design digital rules for this region for the future. The challenge in RCEP was too diverse countries at very different stages of economic and digital development, and growing worries about some of the rules in digital. So that's unfortunate. So what am I talking about? There are three things that we would really like to see in a digital trade agreement. It's the big three. So the first one is to allow information to flow across borders. So think about Food Panda again. What would Food Panda like? Food Panda needs to have their systems replicated in multiple markets and information about their systems flow across borders. They would like me, with my Singapore phone and my Singapore Food Panda information, to be able to order here in Laos without me having to set up a new account. I use my Singapore account, I'm here in Laos, I can order food. And even better, I could pay for it with my wallet attached to my Singapore account. But for that to work, that information has to flow between Singapore and Laos. And so cross-border data flows is very important for businesses that want to operate in multiple markets. That includes both Food Panda, but also payment systems, banking systems, et cetera. That's the first thing you want to see. You want to see a commitment to allow information to flow across borders, especially business information, because I need to conduct business. The second thing that you want to see is something, it's technically called data localization. What does that mean? That says, where does my information have to sit physically in the world? If my information has to stay in Singapore, because there's a data localization rule that says it can't move, then I cannot sit in Laos and use my Singapore app, because my data is in Singapore. So now I have to have data for my food order here housed in Laos, and I would have to have a bank account in Laos in order to pay for my Food Panda app. And I would have to have an address in Lao in order for me to use this app. Everything has to stay here in Lao. You can imagine that this is a problem. There is no way that I can order food in Lao if that's the rule. If the data has to stay here, then you lost me as a customer because I don't have an address. I won't have a bank account. I'm not going to have multiple Food Panda apps on my phone, so you cannot get orders from me. Now that's unfortunate because I could be here for a while and I could be ordering a lot of Food Panda. So data localization matters a lot because firms need that information to be hosted, crucially, in the cloud or in any location that makes the most sense for the company. So Food Panda, and I'm sure they'll talk about this later, and I apologize to Food Panda for telling people what you will say, but Food Panda would say, we need to be able to host our data anywhere that it makes the most sense, where it's safe, where it's secure, where it's inexpensive, where it's reliable. So firms need to have data hosted someplace simple. Companies, especially small ones, do not want to host their own data. You don't want to have to go buy a server for your company and put it in the back room and keep an eye on that. You want to be able to use some cloud service and let them deal with your data. Let them deal with data security, cybersecurity worries. You want to get on with your business. You want to make skirts. You don't want to sit and think about your data information. And the third thing that you would like to see is a very technical issue that matters a lot to small businesses called a customs moratorium for electronic transmissions. Okay, so this sounds like something totally uninteresting to all of you, but let me tell you what it does. Let's imagine that the lady who made this skirt wants to sell it to me in Singapore. Right now, or sorry, not the skirt, the design for the skirt, because it's about the services really. So she wants to sell me the design so that I can replicate the design. Right now, there is no tariff on that design, on her sending me the file with the design, on her services to help me sort out that design and use some other, I'm gonna draw the thing, okay? There is no tariff, but because we have a customs moratorium that is temporary. If we don't extend the moratorium, we could find ourselves subject to customs duties, in other words, tariffs on digital services. So now if she wants to sell me the design, she would have to fill out a customs form, like the ones we looked at yesterday. She would have to pay tariffs on that design, and she may have to pay taxes to me, or I might have to pay taxes to her, to the government on this design. The same thing is true for Food Panda. So Food Panda might have to pay tariffs on any transmissions between a Singapore branch and a Lao branch for digital services. Now you say, this is ridiculous. How can customs do that? Separate problem. The point is, you want that to be permanently in place. You do not want digital services to have to pay tariffs. No one in the services space even knows what a tariff is. They don't want to pay them. So those are the big three. And in RCEP, all three of them have very sweeping exceptions. So basically, all three of them do not exist in RCEP, will not be applied in RCEP. So we could restrict data from moving across borders. We could require data to be hosted locally and not leave the geographic borders. And we could have to pay tariffs at some point on digital services. And this is a real problem because those are the things that you want to see at a minimum in this chapter, and all three of them are a problem. The good news, again, from me, is that ASEAN's commitments are a little stronger, and Lao need not follow the rules. Lao can say, we will allow cross-border business information to flow. We will allow data to be hosted anywhere in RCEP or globally, and we will not impose customs tariffs. So even though the commitment says you could do those things, Lao could also say, we will not do those things. We will allow digital trade to flourish. So I think that's very important for the government to think hard about what they want to do, because if you want your small businesses to succeed, they have to find customers beyond the borders of Lao. And you have to allow customers to come here and still consume goods and services. Otherwise, you lose out on opportunities to make money. And I think we all agree that right now we need as many opportunities to make money as we possibly can deliver for businesses. There are some things in there that are useful around electronic signatures, digital submission, paperless trade, much of which replicates ASEAN's existing commitments. So the chapter is not completely useless, but those big three things that we care about the most are not in RCEP. So while the agreement as a whole, very helpful, this particular chapter is less helpful. The good news is that Lao need not follow that exception. You can see the exception in the footnote there. Lao could say, we will allow data to flow. We will allow data to be hosted wherever it needs to be hosted. We will not impose tariffs. And then you set yourself up for being a much more ambitious, much more favorable market in the future. So I wish I had better news on RCEP. That was a lot of my life spent trying to urge them to be ambitious, and it did not succeed. So that is unfortunate. But the rest of the agreement is good. And so let me stop there, and happy to take questions from you all later. So thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. It's a lot to digest, and I'm sure there'll be questions, given the complexity and also the novelty of the provisions, and also the differences between the e-commerce agreement and the RCEP provisions on e-commerce. So if you have questions, please hold on to your question until after Ms. Souchitta has made her presentation. So I'd like to invite you to the podium to take us through your presentation today.
Maybe I will not because my eyes cannot trust on that. You can put me.
Good morning, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome all of you to the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP. This is the first time for the official dissemination. My presentation will cover 5 sections. For more detail, I will share with you later on. First of all, I would like to share with you the role and responsibility of the e-commerce RCEP in Lao PDR. So the government sector has different role and responsibility, which we'll share in detail in the e-commerce decree to implement the e-commerce. Apologize, please, could you move my slides? So apologize, I cannot move my slides while I'm sharing. So we do have different relevant sectors involved in this. Besides Ministry of Commerce, we also have Ministry of Technology, Finance Ministry, who are involved with this. And the Ministry of Technology and Communication, their role is to manage the data or information. So I apologize, I'm a bit excited. They manage the electronic signature for the Bank of Laos. They also make sure the process is faster. And for Ministry of Finance, they in charge of the customs. So let's look at our main responsibility of Ministry of Commerce and Industry, divided in 3 areas. First is the policy and economic integrations. It's fall under the foreign trade policy. We also work on the legislations decree related to the e-commerce. We also be the focal point for the electronic negotiations. The second area is the business management and the consumer protection. So this is a internal trade department responsibilities. So they provide license or they approve the business implementations on the e-commerce. Next slide, please. So third area under the e-commerce is to promote e-commerce. The Department of Trade Promotions, for the Department of Import-Export, they will oversee the documents. And also to promote e-commerce without paper. And we have SME department to mobilize resources and technicals and coordinate with the development partners to develop e-commerce. So the existing legislations in Lao PDR, first of all, we have electronic law, electronic signature law. Another law is the electronic data management law, and recent is the e-commerce trade law. Currently, the departments who in charge of the e-commerce are drafting the instructions to implement the decree number 296. So these are the legislation related to the e-commerce. So these legislations are the reference for the private and public sectors. So the obligations for e-commerce or RCEP, CLMV country, no, there is no obligations for e-commerce within 5 years, starting in 2026. This obligation will be applied to Laos.
จะต้องได้ให้เหตุให้ทันเวลาเนาะสำหรับวันนี้เขามาเบิ่งมาตราเกี่ยวกับเขาเอิ้น paperless trading เนาะ
Article in paperless trading.
ในภาคนี้มันกลุ่มน้ำเข้าส่งออกจะเป็น
So the Department of Import Export will manage this.
ซึ่งว่าต้องเฮ็ดให้ทุกคนสามารถเข้าถึงข้อมูลที่ว่า
The goal is to ensure that everyone access to these informations and apply paperless trading within 5 years for the electronic signature, which under the responsibility of the Ministry of Technology and Communications. So the law should cover this. I'm not sure if I still have enough time to continue. So online consumer protections. So this require law and legislations within the country to protect the right of the consumers. Article 12.8 is online personal information protection. Is under the responsibility of Ministry of Technology and Communication. So this ministry has to draft law and legislations in line with the obligations. This is to ensure that individual information is protected and there is a legislation available to enforce the agreement. Another article is cross-border transfer of information by electronic means. This also fall under the responsibility of Ministry of Information, Technology and Communication. So e-commerce RCEP work plans. So is to draft or improve the legislations and regional legislations to ensure that it is in line with the Lao obligations. Second is to define the work frame and the mechanism within the country. And third is to develop the electronic trade and development plans, including the electronic trade negotiations. And fourth is the electronic trade partnership. This is to mobilize the resources from different countries And fifth is monitor and consultations with parties which defined in Article 12. For number 2 and number 3, in order to achieve this, it requires the participation and support from the private and public, as well as the international support. So I would like to summarize my presentation for private sector. Yes, we do provide information on trade and business, particular for the transactions, and also no border of trade. So it is an opportunity for a company to improve yourself and to implement your business online. So electronic trade, there is no tariff among the member countries. So this is the opportunity for the company to take advantage of this agreement for the public sector, for the department who provide services. Even though Lao has 5 years of no obligations, 5 years is not long. Therefore, to provide benefit to the private sector, we need to make sure that we implement these 7 obligations on time. So I encourage you to start drafting the legislations or improve the legislations. So that's all of my presentation. If you have question or any query, please let me know. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
ขอขอบใจหลายท่าน
To the stand, because I'm sure there will be question to you from our audience. So thank you, Deborah, and thank you, Souchitta, for the 2 very interesting presentations. I guess you've learned a lot from this, because it's quite novel in a way to present this information. This is not what comes to mind when we talk about e-commerce, the regulations, the laws and the policies, and the fact that ministries are getting organized from the BOL, Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Industry and Commerce, to be really supportive of all these agreements and to make sure that the businesses use this agreement. So that was very useful. I have a few questions myself, but I'd prefer to hear from our audience today. If you have any questions to any of our 2 speakers, either in English or in Lao, please take a microphone. Gentleman in the back, you have a question. Can we get a microphone, please? Thank you. Don't worry, Dinu, I saw your hand. No worries. Okay, please.
เจ้าขอบใจหลายเนาะสบายดีตอนสอบข้าพเจ้ามีคำถามเนาะ Thank you Deborah for your very comprehensive
ขอบใจ
presentation
เนาะท่าน Deborah ที่ให้การนำเสนอหัวข้อที่น่าสนใจโดยเฉพาะแม่น e-commerce เนาะหรือว่าดิจิทัลมื้อนี้
or e-commerce is very new for us according based on our experience on this is very new, but it's boom. As you know, it's boom now, the e-commerce on over the world. So as Souchitta has mentioned, is related to so many government agency on e-commerce. And also regarding this, as you know, the e-commerce is boom in Laos. So of course, we have to prepare for it. And my question is that regarding to the public sector, it's very challenges for us to prepare for this. For example, according to our law and regulation is existing, I don't think it's enough to dealing with this, and where we will start from. Our government official is confusing on this. Where we will start, the first step, what we are going to do, and also according to our law and regulation on the activity of the economic of the doing business in Laos, you have to pay tax. But now, e-commerce, the business people, they are very enjoy doing business on e-commerce, but our government get nothing from that in terms of the income or tax. So how can we dealing with this, and where we will start? If it's stay for the government sector. Thank you, Dora.
Excuse me, we are recording this dialogue, so could you please tell us where you're from, your name and where you're from?
Sorry, my name is Nong from the MOIC. I'm dealing with the trade and services. I will be speaker in the afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I guess maybe one question to Souchitta on how the government agencies, the staff get prepared and get ready for this new topic. How can you get training, capacity building on e-commerce so that you can advise businesses? And maybe the second question, I know that Deborah is very fond of this question on taxes and taxation. So the second question I will ask Deborah to respond. So maybe Souchitta, if you could go first on how do you get ready. We've heard from your CV that you have had extensive exposure to negotiation on e-commerce, but what about other staff? How do they get trained on everything we've heard this morning?
Thank you for your question. ขออนุญาตตอบเป็นภาษาลาวเนาะเนื่องจากว่าคือข้าพเจ้าได้บรรยายไปหันเนาะ
I would like to respond in Laos, as I present to you earlier, that we had many law and legislation, and a lot of them are in the process. Currently, we haven't disseminate a new decree. However, it is our plan, the Department of the Foreign Trade policy, that we are preparing to disseminate the decree to the public and private sector. And beside that, we are going to invite different sector who involved with the e-commerce to share with you. So this is our future plan. For other topics, for the agriculture promotions to China through e-commerce. However, due to our limited budget for public sector, yes, the international support they provide, the budget support, we plan to disseminate this information.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Souchitta. I would like also to add to what you've just mentioned two things. First thing is that ERIA organized a few training. I think, Deborah, you were here like 3 years ago on e-commerce negotiations for government officials. So the development community, I would say, is also keenly aware of the needs in our PDR. ERIA also translated, I think, 12 laws from Lao into English from the e-commerce decree to the e-transactions law, electronic signature. So they are available, hopefully still in MOIC, because this was done for MOIC. But we also have in ERIA the text of these laws in English. And finally, a third point, I think Deborah mentioned the e-commerce agreement, ASEAN e-commerce agreement work plan. The work plan contains a lot of different initiative on training, capacity building. It's a regional work plan, so obviously we did not single out the needs of Lao PDR, but there are a lot of opportunities in the work plan for training of Lao officials. And this is something you should discuss also with your development partners, being Australia, EU, the World Bank, the UN agencies, that training is required. Yeah, obviously, when we talk about RCEP and ASEAN, trade in goods and trade in services come first to mind, but there are also other topics where training is less available. So that's something that we as consultants, we recommend it, but in the end, it's up to government officials to talk to development partners and to say, this is needed, we have commitments, we have obligations, we not necessarily understand everything, so please help us. Thank you. Second question,
Yeah, so, e-commerce is challenging because it is horizontal and it cuts across really the whole of the economy. In fact, I have a hard time saying this is digital trade and this is all other trade, because increasingly all trade is digital. So it's very hard to think about digital trade without thinking about a whole of government responsibility. And coordination of whole of government is difficult. So it is always hard for a whole of government response, but necessary. So please do take advantage of opportunities for capacity building. But for the companies in this room, there is a really, I mentioned this yesterday, but it is exceptionally important in digital trade that you communicate with government officials regularly and that you hold dialogues between the public and private sector, because you need to ensure that government officials understand where the private sector is at. What are you trying to do? What are the obstacles or difficulties you're facing? What are the things that you would like to see, especially in priority order? Because the private sector, who are engaged in daily digital trade, will have very clear ideas of what they think should go first. And you need to have opportunities, I think, for a dialogue between the private sector and government to successfully address this complicated set of topics. So please do engage with government and government engage with business to ensure that the end result are better policies that allow all businesses to be successful in an online space, and to be successful domestically, but also to engage in trade overseas. On tax, this is a very sensitive issue. It is not, tax is never in a trade agreement, because we have always said tax is someone else's problem. That's the finance people, central bank, you deal with tax, we deal with trade. But in the digital space, it's increasingly difficult to say tax is not my problem, because tax clearly could be my problem. I understand government need for revenue, and I understand the complaints from businesses that are completely physical, that it is unfair that we have some firms in the online space who do not pay tax or do not pay the same tax. But I also think you need to be careful that you think hard about who is in the online space and whether they are able to pay taxes in the first place. I suspect that many of the small businesses in Lao who are moving online may not have a formal legal registration, but they could participate in online trade. So there are hundreds of small vendors selling especially food products all across this city. Any one of them might actually be a vendor in an online platform. And that might be the difference between them succeeding as a business and them not succeeding. Because you could have food delivery from a small stall in a street market being delivered to someone in a home or an office for lunch or whatever. That might make them successful, but they're probably not legally registered to pay tax. And if you require them to be legally registered and pay tax and do that in an online space, you may, first of all, collect very little tax because we're not selling a lot of things and we're not making a lot of money off of it. But you might also destroy their profits. Like the little bit of money they are making from being online could be taken in taxes if you're not careful. So I think this tax issue, I understand the need for revenue, and I understand the complaints from offline companies. What I would suggest is that you think hard about tax efforts and how much it will cost you to collect those taxes. You will often find you spend more to collect the tax than you make in the tax. And you think about what those taxes do to your smallest companies who are currently really struggling to survive. And you say, is this the moment when I want to tax those very small companies who are doing everything they can to survive? Maybe the answer is yes. Maybe the answer is no. You have to think hard about it. And crucially, make sure you are having a conversation between your government with its desire for revenue and the individuals and companies who would be taxed in different scenarios, and ask them what would be the implication of having to pay tax. Would they still be able to pay the tax? Would they still be profitable? Would they go out of business? Because if you don't have that information, you could kill a lot of companies, or at least keep a lot of companies from moving online. And maybe that's not your objective. So when you prepare to tax in the online space, you have to think hard about who do you want to tax? How do you want to tax them? How can you collect that tax? And if you decide to go ahead, how can you make this the easiest possible application so that businesses are, because remember, it's not just paying the tax, it's also the cost of compliance. So if I am being I have to make sure that I record every sale, every purchase, that I manage my tax receipts. That can be a lot of compliance costs on the company. So it's the tax plus the cost of dealing with the tax on the small business. So I would say on taxes, I get it. Think hard about what you're going to do and who it will affect, and then decide whether or not the tax collected is worth that level of difficulty for your economy, and especially for your smallest businesses. Because I would suggest, as my final point, you want your businesses to go online, because the way of the future is to be online. And you want as many of your companies to be in an online space, to be digitally aware, to be buying and selling the materials they need, their services, their goods online, because that's the wave of the future. And the harder you make it, the longer you wait for that to happen, the harder it is for your firms to be competitive. So I know that you have until 2026 to implement many of these laws. Really try hard to make this fast, because again, every day that you wait in the digital space, every day you wait is like a year, it's like a dog year, every year is really long for a small digital business. So the faster you can implement the rules, the faster you can accelerate processes, training, skills, capacity, the better for your small businesses.
Thank you, Deborah. Actually, we have several questions from our online participants, and this one, I guess, will go to you as well, Deborah, because I know you have worked on this. There's a question from Mr. Yeke Pong. Say, I would like to ask Dr. Deborah, the e-commerce is recently increasing, especially during the time of COVID, whilst mistrust issues between customers and the sellers is becoming more and more critical. in your opinion, how can we work to build more trust, like for instance, a trust mark at the regional level to increase e-commerce adoption?
That is a great question. It is true that there are some challenges in the online space that we may or may not have in the offline space. And one of them is, how do we deal with unsatisfied customers, with returned products, with fraudulent products, with fraud in payments? There's a lot of challenges in the regular space, but even worse in the online space, partly because we don't have the laws in place to cover things like fraud, fraudulent activity, payments issues. So you need that policy infrastructure for the online space to solve some of these challenges. And then you do need to develop ways that you can show trust in your product or services. And a trust mark is something that Asean is trying to implement. So you could have firms that qualify, that get the certification as a trusted provider of goods or services. You can do that at the Asean level. You could do that within Lao. You could do a pilot project and test the idea. You can have, customer reviews often serve that purpose, so that a customer who feels they have been mistreated may comment in social media. You may not, as a government, have to do much. Maybe they do that on their own. It is a very challenging space, and there are some rules that we do not yet have. One big problem always in the e-commerce goods space is returns. How do we handle returns? And critically in this region, what about cross-border returns? What if I order something from Thailand or Singapore and it gets to me here and it's not what I wanted, it's the wrong size, it's not what was advertised? How do I return that? The rules in this part of the world don't cover cross-border returns. This is a major problem, actually, because a lot of online sales are returned, and in a cross-border space, again, we need the rules in place at the ASEAN level, at least, to think about that returns and issues around trust. So the trust mark is useful. We need something on returns as well. We had one of our small businesses that we worked with sold wedding dresses. And you can imagine, if you are buying a wedding dress online, you want to make sure that it fits. So what do? You order that dress in 3 sizes. One you think is too small, one you think is too big, one you think will fit you. And then you try them on, and whichever one fits you keep, and you send the other 2 back. Because you can't show up for your wedding in a dress that does not fit. The problem that this dressmaker out of the Philippines had is that the customs officials kept insisting that her return dresses were imported dresses. And she had to spend 1 day every week at customs showing them the label and saying, that's my dress. Here's my website. This is my dress. This is a return, not a new dress I bought. And so, this is a lot of money that she had to spend on wrangling with her customs office over returns. So it's a problem that you need to solve. And it's a problem, I will tell you, that Philippine customs had no idea was a problem, because they hadn't heard this from companies before. So you have to have that dialogue between companies and governments in order to solve some of these issues, like returns, like a trust mark, in order to satisfy the needs of the market and government rules.
Thank you, Deborah. Dino, you had a questions? Or Madam, yes, in the back, can you get a microphone? I take 2 more questions because we're just behind schedule. So one from the lady in the back, and then one from the gentleman in the front. And then the other question we can raise during the session too. Yes, Madam.
เจ้าขออนุญาตใช้ภาษาลาวเนาะข้าพเจ้า
I would like to share in Laos from the Lao Telecom Authority, representing Ministry of Technology and Communication. First of all, congratulations for the negotiation team, and thank you the organizer for this meeting, because this is the platform to share information. It is not a question, but is a comments, or would like to share information on behalf of Ministry of Technology and Communication. In my opinion, is a challenge work, but is necessary for the future and recovery of the economy. So we see the importance of the e-commerce is not only for certain sector, but we want to spread to across the sectors. So one priority is the to promote the economy recovery, which is linked with the RCEP agreement. When we talk about cross-border data flow and data localized detail, in the developed country, you have the system in place. However, in Laos, there are a lot of challenges. In the past, we assess the readiness for the government sector, see the what readiness to change to the digital platform. I would like to propose to the Ministry of Commerce to for the assessment of the readiness. So we want to know the challenges and readiness of Lao PDR. So we need to do as soon as possible. Firstly, we need to assess our skill or the capacity for Lao, particularly the differences between the urban and remote area, and also the customer, how to introduce the tool to access to the e-commerce. We need to work together between Ministry of Commerce and Ministry of Technology to conduct the assessments, the awareness of e-commerce. So if we compare the awareness of the e-commerce to the international, we are very basic. So we want to know how ready are we going to link with the cyber safety and Ministry of the Public Security, because the Vice Minister Vilaila Kamphong in charge of this. This is one of the issues that we need to concern for the data privacy. So if we want to see our work plans, we need to select out the product, the quality and unique product, and we need to set up pilot project if we can sell in the digital platform. So this is simulate our e-commerce system. So if the government is ready for the electronic signature, for the formal or the official documents, we need to try with one product. And then later on, we follow with the furniture or other product, including Food Panda. You can link to this platform. So for Ministry of Technology and Communication, it is our first priority to ensure that we can generate income through the digital platform, either physical food. We also consider the software, the startup, the idea of Laos that we can sell in RCEP country. And we also need to consider on the communication company, the joint venture, like for example, 49% that Lao own. So if any company that have Lao own 50%, we want to pilot with them because we use data roaming doesn't create a benefit. If we don't have high traffic value, that we don't benefit. Besides we selling goods, we need to sell service and software. In the future plans, we need to work very hard if we want to meet with the deadline. So we already signed contract with companies to develop or to improve the electronics infrastructure. So we work 24/7. Lastly, I would like to exchange experience with our consultants. And we know that this is a complicated and there are many dimensions. So what is the simplest of the coordinations? Do we have any model that we can learn? For example, Korea, Japan, Australia, New Zealand. Is there any model that support that we can learn for e-commerce? Like, I would like you to share information to help us that we can learn more, because we want to fasten our process. We do have tools, but we haven't utilized them. I believe that Lao people who develop platform, but we don't know where they are and then don't allow them to work. If any of you confused with my comments, my technical explanations, please let me know. I can clarify more. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just ask the gentleman for his question and then I'll allow you to respond. Gentleman in the front. Yes, please tell us who you are and who your question is addressed directed to.
เจ้าสบายดีตอนเช้าเนาะ Good morning ข้าพเจ้าชื่อ
Good morning ชื่อสวงดวงตาวิไล from the LNCCI from Vientiane capital. I'm the head of the cabinet of LNCCI. I would like to ask Souchitta SRITTHIRATH. When we talk about e-commerce, when we talk about role and responsibility of 4 ministries, with its Ministry of Commerce, Ministry of Technology, Bank of Lao PDR, and Ministry of Finance. I would like you to visit the role and responsibility of the ministry role, and you should conduct the assessment of the challenges and positive point of their role, or is there any need to change anything? Thank you.
Right. So thank you, sir. So 2 questions. The first question from the representative of the MTC on any model that you would recommend for Lao to follow or to learn from, to you, Deborah. And the second question on the division of labor and the coordination among the different agencies that Souchitta you mentioned in your presentation. How is the work divided? Do you meet regularly? Do you feel that you are duplicating somehow, sometimes? So I'll have Deborah first and then Souchitta to conclude.
Great questions. So first, I would say There are lots of models. And I think you will pull from others different pieces of how governments work, of how platforms work, of how companies work. You are in great shape because we have so many examples that you can use of what seems to work. So that's the first thing. The second good news, in my view, about digital trade is that government does not and should not do it all. You don't have to make a platform. There are lots of platforms. You're not making a new platform. You are making sure that the rules allow the platform to operate. The platform can be a big platform. It can be a very small platform. All the government needs to do is ensure that the basics are there, that we have basic infrastructure, mobile infrastructure, that we have basic skills, and the skills, to be honest, are getting much easier. So if you can use your phone, most of you can be digital services providers. You can order online. You don't need to make it complicated. We're not developing coders these days. You can, but you don't need to. So the good news is that your government does not need to do it all. It just needs to get the basics right and let companies do what companies do. And the third thing I would say is that you don't need to make it perfect. So you don't have to have a comprehensive assessment of every issue and every possible complication. Get started. That's the digital beauty. You know, you start, you discover a problem, you revise. You discover a problem, you revise it again. And because digital is so fast, you can roll out a new problem, a new solution very quickly. So you don't have to do it all. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you do need to get going. So I would say that follow the models that are available in lots of places. Some of them have been referenced. Again, there is a work plan for the RCEP e-commerce agreement. Look at that work plan for Lao. There is the Asean e-commerce work plan. There are lots of aid agency and donor activities around this space. So get in contact with partners that you think are helpful for your government or your ministry or your agency. Talk to your companies, but you don't have to solve everything. Let the companies solve business problems. But do make sure that you have a platform or a place where you can exchange information with companies regularly. What is the real problem that you face today? Let's be candid with one another about our challenges and our opportunities, and then we can solve these problems together. And at the end, hopefully we have a much more vibrant economy with a lot more firms that are engaged and generating revenue, that grow and become larger companies, that employ more people, because that's what we're hoping that we get out of digital trade. More companies to selling to more places with more customers who actually turn to especially Lao firms for solutions, for products and services.
Perfect. I think the message is clear, loud and clear. And Souchitta, back to you. So BOL, MOIC, MTC, Ministry of Finance, MOIC, all working on e-commerce, and it's good news that so many of these agencies are working on that. But how do you ensure efficiency, avoid duplication? How do you talk to each other so that just giving the example of another country in the region that is started to develop an e-commerce law in 2004, and they passed the law in 2019, 50 years, because every time they had a new draft, one of the other ministry was saying, oh, but that's already covered. Authentication already covered, remove it from the law. And signature already covered by another ministry. So in the end, they have a very nice e-commerce law, but it's only for their own ministry, not for the entire country. Souchitta, difficult question.
ขอบใจสำหรับคำถามเนาะข้าพเจ้าขอตอบคำถามท่านผู้เข้าร่วมทั้งหน้านี่ก่อนเนาะสำหรับ
Let me answer the question to the gentleman for the coordinations or challenges. How do we coordinate? We coordinate in for the negotiations. We haven't coordinated on the implementation implementation yet. In each ministry, they appoint the official to be part in the e-commerce negotiations. So we coordinate in terms of what issue can we accept or what topic that we cannot accept. However, we face challenges. For example, Ministry of Technology and Communications, they merge with Ministry of Science. So with this had the issue raised because of the staff, because they have new staff in place. So that's why the conversation is not continuous. Other countries also face challenges, not only Laos. In Brunei, they also have internal coordination issue. So before we made an agreement within the country to give the answer to the platform, we need to work together closely. For Jaimali questions, Ministry of Technology and Ministry of Commerce will work closer together. Currently, we are preparing the committee for the e-commerce, and also responsible for drafting the work plan, starting from the drafting work plans and approve the plans and the implementations. So we will send the document to you shortly to appoint a staff to be in this committee. So the plan that we are going to draft is under the RCEP and the e-commerce ASEAN and ASEAN, Australia and New Zealand. So yes, we try to complete that, but we still have issue that need to clarify. And another issue is cost-cutting issue between the investment and finance sectors. So we are still negotiating. The national electronic plan, we need support from the donors and the development partners in order to achieve this plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Souchitta. Very good answer. I hope we can implement all this and that you will get the support that you deserve from development partners. I know we have a few more questions in the room. We also have a few questions online. I will keep these questions from our online participants for the next session, session 2, after the coffee break. So just that you get ready, we have questions on informal businesses doing e-commerce. If you want them to register or tax them, they will have no more business. How do we deal with that? Question on a single digital currency for e-commerce at the regional level. Is that possible or not? So that 2 of the questions we still have from the online discussions. So we are going to stop for a short break. Before we stop, join me in giving a round of applause to our 2 speakers today. Thank you very much. And we are going to stop now. It's 10:35, so we'll have a 15-minute coffee break, 1-5. So we come back at 10:50. Oh, okay, 10:55. 10:50, right? 10:50. Not 10:15, 10:50. Today. I will start at 10:50. You can join, you cannot join, up to you. So thank you very much for your attention, and coffee is served outside.
Well, I mean, what you can do is you can just say, the tax is not on individuals, tax is not on the individual seller. You're gonna tax, possibly you tax the possibly another way that you could tax is potentially off consumer who buys, especially if the consumer buys using. No, if I always want to, yes, yes.
And then before that, yeah, so it has to have the cost of
It may, so there should be thresholds. So anything below, let's call it $50 no tax there. Above 50, maybe you have a tax. And the advantage of that is if your small business has a plan to sell something, then they will not see you. So below 50, they can sell. Plus, the government is trying to collect tax on $3. The cost of the collecting tax is far more. You're going to make this much money. It costs you that much. So you have to think hard. I think hard. How much money am I going to make? How much is it going to cost me to make that kind of tax? How much is it going to cost the company to pay that tax? And if you do all of that and you say small sales, micro businesses should be exempt, I think that's okay. Even though I know it's complicated.
but the role of
But I would say
has to
protect.
take care.
Well, at some point, but I would say that is, for me, that's not your priority. Your priority is let's get our companies to decide and formally register where now we do tax. So until that happens, don't tax them because you want them to grow. So let's decide what is that threshold. So if you make it
The building of
exactly. So if you say micro businesses, informal business, we want them to ultimately what you want. You want businesses to register informal, and you want them to grow beyond 1 or 2 or 5 people. What can we do to encourage small businesses to grow? One thing that we help and we make it like complicated, they won't grow. So we need them to be a certain size, and then we say, please get registered. And then after they're registered and they start to grow, then let them grow first. Because otherwise they'll never grow. They'll spend so much money on taxes and then on compliance that they can never make it.
No, I was looking.
And do you have income tax? You don't have income tax.
But
But you have company tax, right? You have company tax. So again, maybe you don't need to tax every transaction. But what you do want is once you get to a certain size, we take a piece of your company tax. So you could say, we don't care about the little tax. We don't care whether you buy a bottle of water or flowers. What we care about is when you get a company selling flowers. The company is big enough, we tax the company. So we're not worried about all the little taxes, which are expensive and difficult.
to tax the company, not the
Tax the company, not the
platform.
platforms. You have to say, I mean, it's not going to be perfect, but especially now, with all these informal unregistered companies that are tiny. What can we do to get them to grow and to perform? That's really what we want to cover. You want them to grow and you want them to be able to pay salaries and want them to be able to pay taxes. If you tax them too soon, they'll never come up.
already regulate that we will not tax the business, local business. But just thinking that if I want to export or,
Yes, but that's
or
the problem.
import
So
a
if
lot
you want
of
to import, okay, if you want to
China.
export, imagine you're a small, you're this Kurt lady, she wants to export to me. I buy it in Singapore. What if she has to pay taxes in Singapore? Then she would have to be registered as a vendor in Singapore with a business with tax ID in Singapore and a bank account in Singapore to pay the Singapore taxes to the government. It's a disaster. So you, again, you want to say, it's not just what we do to our company, it's what other people will do to us. If we tax inbound, then they will tax our inbound. And all of a sudden, you're allowed strictly to sell overseas. And that's where the money is. I mean, you sell a lot of stuff here, but, you know, people out of Singapore or Europe or the US, they have a lot more money to spend on skirts than Laos. So ultimately, again, what are we trying to do? We're trying to get skirt lady to have enough money that she is able to scale up, to get more people to do media, to hire more staff, to export more products. That's what we want. Thank you.
I just had one this morning with the yeah, I'll call you. Good morning. So we've got tickets. Already. Yeah, much.
Yeah, let's go online questions.
Are there many online?
So I'd like to start our session 2 with our private sector representatives. We've heard from ATC Research Center. We heard from Souchitta, the Ministry of Industry and Commerce, about the public dimension of e-commerce in our PDR. Now we are going to turn to the private sector and to hear from the private sector what they think about this agreement. What's the current status quo on e-commerce in Lao PDR from a private sector perspective? And to do this, we have two speakers. We have two private sector representatives, Mr. Nialat Jannatuk and Mr. Tanuson Ponamat. Allow me to, first of all, ask them to come to the front and come to the podium, please. Thank you. So let's give them a bit of encouragement. Thank you for joining us. So, Ms. Tanialat Chanusuk, I hope I pronounced your name correctly, is the Managing Director of Delivery Hero Laos Seoul Company Limited, or Foodpanda. Foodpanda is a market leader in online food and grocery delivery platform in Laos, established in November 2019, where Ms. Tanialat is a founder that leads a local team in starting and building up its market leading position at hyper-growth level over the past 3 years. We also have Mr. Thanuson Ponamat, welcome, Vice President of the Lao National Chamber of Commerce and Industry, LNCCI, President of the Lao ICT Association, Chairman of the Allo Technology Company Limited ICT Solution Made by Laos, President of the Allo XCO Limited Internet Businesses, as well as a number of other positions as either Director, Chairman, or CEO. So thank you very much for joining us today. I hope you have enjoyed some of the discussion we had in the first session that set the scene for this discussion. So the way we're going to proceed is I have a few questions which I believe are of interest to our audience that I will ask you. We will then ask questions from our audience here, and we already have a few questions from our online participants on Zoom. So my first question would go to Mr. Thanuson Ponamat. And we've heard this morning about the role of different government agencies in coordinating, regulating, encouraging e-commerce development in Lao PDR. I'd like to turn to you and ask you, what is the role of the LNCCI in this space, in the digital tech, e-commerce, innovation, ICT? Do you have any committee, any group, or made of members of the LNCCI to work on these issues and to dialogue, communicate with the governments? Over to you, sir.
Hello. Okay, good morning. First of all, thank you for having me here. It's very good workshop and very knowledge, and it's very important, especially in this digital age. E-commerce is very important for the development. So I'm currently representing Lao National Chamber of Commerce to provide some update and feedback. And based on the question, LNCCI is representing, or is the main organization for the businesses in Laos. It is national. And, we also see that digital transformation is very important for the businesses as well. And then that's why within the Chamber of Commerce, we set up the committee called, Business Digital Transformation, or SME Digital Transformation Committee. And this committee is also working closely with the Lao ICT Association in the many aspects of helping businesses and SME in the digital transformation. So a lot of activity and works are done through the Lao ICT Association. So Lao ICT Association has set up the mission, 4 main missions within this scope of digital transformation. First pillar is to work with the government, on the giving feedback and recommendation on the law and regulation. Similar to this, we also participate in this, RCEP implementation, work closely with Ministry of Industry and Commerce and Ministry of Foreign Affairs making suggestions and comments and provide feedback into this implementation of this RCEP. And many other law and regulation relating to ICT and digital. We are also be part of that, formulation of the regulation. The other one that's quite important one is that we have been working closely with Ministry of Technology and Communication in formulating the national master plan on digital economy for Laos for the next 5 years, 10 years, and 20 years, which is also important, I think, for e-commerce development as well. And in that master plan is also mentioned about promoting e-commerce as a priority. So the other pillar from Lao ICT Association is that supporting SME and businesses in the digital transformation by providing knowledge and tools and also service support in implementing digital transformation. A few projects I like to highlight is the first one is a project on digital literacy for private sector in terms of digital transformation. We got the support from the USAID. We implementing what the name is Smart Up. So Smart Up is that online training for SME. We set up 8 curriculum. The main one is e-commerce, digital transformation, digital marketing, and general literacy of how to implementing digital technology, and many other I will not count. The other, this one is about providing support in terms of knowledge and understanding of digital. The second one that we are working closely on this particular one is to providing and make suggestion on the suitable digital tools to the SME. We have signed an MOU with 4 main SME center in helping them with making suggestion on what kind of digital tool is suitable for the SME in Laos. So that's LNCSI working through LICA to support the SME digital transformation. And the third one is to promote the awareness of digital, the importance for the digital transformation. We are working with various ministries to organize many events like the Lao Digital Week, Lao ICT Expo, Lao Startup Fest, and a series of Lao Digital Forum. Each forum has different subjects: e-commerce, fintech, and cybersecurity, e-education. So every 3 months we organize a Lao Digital Forum. Thank you.
Thank you. It's quite comprehensive, actually, the number of activities and initiatives that you're having, and I think it's the right platform for you to encourage businesses, but also government officials to take advantage of all these opportunities. So thank you very much for sharing that information. Mr. Nyad, I'm turning to you. We have already made a lot of publicity. You have a strong fan base here with Deborah and myself and others. So we are among friends. So we've heard from your CV about the exceptional growth that you have had as Foodpanda in Lao PDR. Well, you've heard some of the difficulties, the challenges, the complexities of doing e-commerce in Lao PDR this morning. So I have, just as a starter, have 2 questions for you. The first one is, what prompted Foodpanda, which is globally known as a delivery company, to come to Laos? Why Laos, given the small size of the market, the quite low development of e-commerce, the fact that digital payments is not yet widespread? So why Laos? And what do you consider as the main obstacles still for adoption of e-commerce by businesses and consumers? And maybe a third question, which is, are you aware of all these agreements as businesses? Are you aware of the ASEAN e-commerce agreement, the RCEP e-commerce provisions? Is it something that you pay attention to, you follow, or you think that no, it's something for headquarters or for government to discuss? Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. So my name is Tanyalat. I'm currently Managing Director for Foodpanda Laos. I think your question have two parts to it. Why Foodpanda come to Laos? I'll address that first. So we started in 2019, and back then, Foodpanda is operating in 8 countries in the APAC region. Originally, we are headquartered in Singapore, and in 2017, we were acquired by Delivery Hero, which is a group in Germany, and bringing us to as part of public company. So there's a lot of funding coming in during that time. And I think Foodpanda has always have this positioning at being a market leader for food delivery platform as well as e-commerce in the APAC region. So the first thing that come to mind for them at that time is expanding to new market. And within that period of time, I happen to know some of the connection from the Singapore team. So I went there and present the idea for Lao market. Of course, I have to went through a process of do market research for the Laos country. The idea that I pitched to Foodpanda is actually, we are one of the very emerging market in e-commerce. And the selling point, to be honest, is that being the first mover in Laos, right? Because back then, if we are looking at the Asian market, especially the Southeast Asian, we have a lot of regional or global competitors already have their footprint in many countries. But Laos, we have none yet. So you can look at that at like both opportunity and also challenge. But I feel that that time was the right time to present opportunity. And I was able to convince them, and they believe in the market of 7 million population, have a very well coverage of internet and mobile penetration. And just a little bit of background, because I worked for Ministry of Post and Telecommunication for 6 years as part of the Lao National Internet Center. So I have this knowledge on digital penetration in Laos. And that's the idea that I was also presented to the investor. And after a while, about 6-7 months, they decided to invest in Laos. That was when we start launching. So if you to ask me why Laos, I would say our market is quite in an emerging stage and competitor is low. That's the two main attractive point for the investor at that point. The second question, sorry.
So the second question is, well, you are in Laos, you are investing in Laos, and obviously what you want to have is want to have vendors, businesses that come online, and consumers that also use your platform. So what are still the obstacles for businesses and consumers to buy or sell online?
Got it. So essentially, Foodpanda is technology-driven application, right? Every stakeholder that involved in Foodpanda is driven by technology. So our customer have to use the application to order food or grocery or products. Our vendors have to have technology to accept orders, processing it, and our riders, which is the main infrastructure of our business, have to use application to do all their work. Coming in, apply for job, understand the application, accept order, deliver it. Everything is run by technology as its core. So when we were here in 2019, I would say that we are almost like and educator for the market. So every stakeholder that we involve, the most challenging thing is actually their technology literacy. And we have to do a lot of innovative education materials to help our vendors, as well as our customer, as well as our riders to function in this ecosystem of ours. It did took a lot of time initially and a lot of challenges, I have to admit. And then COVID happened. COVID happened about 6 months after we launched our service. Not to say that before COVID, we haven't seen growth. We've seen growth like month on month. That means adoption for our service is there. The demand is there. However, COVID helped us in the way that it opened up the mind of vendors, of riders, and as well as our customer to really open up and try to adopt it. So a little bit for COVID, and on the point of business functionality, we have to be very innovative in inventing a lot of process that target toward educating the market.
Yeah, and I had a third question, which is, well, the subject of this dialogue is the RCEP agreement. So as a leader in the market, is it something that you are paying attention to, these agreements, all these laws and regulations that are being developed, and even, I would say, are you participating or like giving recommendations, suggestions to different agencies on saying like, this is what we are seeing, this is what we are observing, so please pay attention to that aspect, like for instance, payment adoptions, etc.
So for RCEP, maybe I'm in different position because I used to work for the ministry. So I'm aware of the RCEP framework and agreement. But on general involvement in the company shoe, in the private sector, with the government, I would say foodpanda in particular, I'm not sure about other e-commerce business, but for us in particular, we involve quite extensively with many ministry or many government sector to work on implementing or forming e-commerce law. So one example is last year, we are fortunate that we're part of the LNCCI. We are the member there. So we are aware of all this development. And when there are new law or regulation that being formed that involve e-commerce, usually they would extend the invitation for open discussion. And we were able to, sat in and also voice our concern, opinions, and real life problem that we are facing when dealing with regulation, with customs, with many things that involve in our business. To be honest, if I have to raise like one example, it even hard to pick. When we first launched, for example, right, VAT adoption for our vendors is very challenging because the concept of VAT for mom and pop restaurant is almost non-existent. And then foodpanda came in as an international company. We have to be compliant with the law. So when we impose this VAT on customer or on our vendors, it stir a lot of noises up, and we have to do that part of education too, not just on technology, but also on the rule and regulation that we have to comply with. Another thing is freelancing job of our riders, right? The labor law didn't really have that specific part that clearly state that how much that we have to withhold in terms of their personal income tax, whether it's personal income tax or freelancer, or it's very challenging, and we have to involve with the government very extensively on every part of our business to make it happen. But I would say they're quite open mind to hear what the private sector have to share as well.
Thank you. And I'd like to rebound on the question on the answer you just provided, maybe with Mr. Tanuson. You mentioned the fact that while you're working with riders and vendors, and I guess a lot of them are not registered, they are informal. So there was a question online as well, and maybe something that I can ask at NCCI. I'm sure all your members are registered, but the fact is that more and more vendors, especially during the pandemic, people who moved online to sell their business, sell their services or product, they're not registered. So is LNCCI aware of this problem? I'm sure you are, but what is done for businesses who are starting on e-commerce, maybe in Facebook shop, Instagram shops, and want to move to the formal sector as a formal e-commerce businesses? How can we help them to move online? Is there something in the LNCCI or in the Lao ICT Association helping them to move to the formal sector?
Yes. Yeah, I think everybody, not just in Laos, we are aware that during the pandemic is kind of accelerator for the digital adoption, and there's not much choice. There were not much choice for the SME to go online. If they don't do it, they just can just disappear or bankrupt. Those who have some strategy and the ability or willing to do something online, they were surviving during the pandemic. And we also witnessed in Laos, at that time, e-commerce platform is not really, advanced. I mean, the complex or the complete e-commerce mostly are just like, a showroom. You can post your product and then negotiate sales and then payment from other places, not really full e-commerce. And many users, SME, they don't know about technology much. Digital adoption in Laos are through when the smartphone is coming into place, and it's easier for the people to use smartphone in implementing many things. That's why if we talk about how many people using social media and how many people using website, you get that Facebook users are the numbers of internet users that we can assume. So that's why Facebook play a very important role during that pandemic, and SME and individual users also use Facebook to do trade. I mean, in the Laos case, and at least they can rely on that platform to do some trading. So the question is that how we support them. Like I mentioned before, from the LNCCI side, there has been a cooperation between LNCCI and Ministry of Industry and Commerce, setting up an e-commerce site, which is not really a full e-commerce, but at least SME can post their product online. The project on that called PlowsMe. So PlowsMe website is the intention is to promote the Lao product. So mostly Lao products are all product that are made in Laos, are eligible to post on that website PlowsMe, and the goal is to help Lao SME to export to the other country, especially to take advantage of this FTA within the Asean. And I think in the future is about this RCEP opportunities. The PlowsMe website, because of the pandemic, the consultant in Singapore could not come, and then the site is still like a showroom for me. Like people just post the product and to try to sell online. But we are in the process of having the phase 2 of PlowsMe, which will start in the next few months, which should provide a complete e-commerce platform for for SME, to support SME. And apart from that initiative with the ministry, we also encourage, the member of Lao ICT Association to develop the platform for e-commerce. And we also push for the BOL for the payment. And now, the payment gateway is already now available for platform developer to use, and they can do it. Even the order from overseas can be done through that payment gateway. There are a few operators within our association. Mentioned a few like Yes Please, the e-commerce platform, Dropping Eggs, and Yula, and other more, so that they start to be able to do complete e-commerce platform, integrate with the payment system, and integrating with the delivery provider. We have seen that there are many innovation on the logistics side. We can see digital logistic provider popping up every week, every month. More than 20, things like FedEx or DHL Lao version already in here. So the infrastructure to support e-commerce is there, but like I mentioned before, the digital literacy for the SME is still not there. That's why we work with USAID on how to do like I mentioned before, online learning, so SME can learn by themselves. There is at the moment we are providing free training tools for SME, but we are also looking at the sustainability of the project also in the future. Maybe we will have to find a source of revenue for that project. So this is about the initiative from LNCI during the COVID-19.
Thank you. I have a similar question, more or less, for you, which is, are you also trying to help those vendors who want to sell on the platform but are not registered, are not formal, to either comply with laws and regulation or to become formal so that they can sell on your platform? And also I have a question, maybe it's more personal question, but I'd like to know what type of registration do you have as an e-commerce, as a delivery platform? Are you for the Lao government? Are you a digital company? Are you a transport or logistic provider? Are you a payment provider? Did you have to register in different agencies? So you can start with that if you want, with that part. Thank you.
Okay. Maybe I'll start with the second question. It's very interesting that you asked this question, because that's exactly the challenge that we have when we first kind of incorporate the entity here. So when we reach out to our legal advisor, right, they would say that food delivery is a last mile logistic service, and there's a certain criteria that would say within one city, then you are part of Ministry of Post and Telecommunication and under Department of Post. And if you are above certain weight or area of service, like cross city or cross country, then you would have to register under Ministry of Transportation. So that was the advice that we received. So in the beginning, we register under Ministry of Post and Telecommunication, and we operate on that license of postal service. And then once we have our presence on the application and people kind of using our application, then we become an e-commerce application. So we have to register another license under Department of Domestic Trade, Ministry of Industry and Commerce. So currently we have 3 licenses to operate our service. postal, industry, commerce, domestic trade, and transportation. So yeah, 3 licenses. And every city that we go, we have to reapply for all 3 licenses. And you can imagine the challenge that we operate in 18 cities across Laos. And every city is at different timeline, right? So every year we also have to renew our license. It's very challenging in terms of licenses and regulation, to be honest. This is my personal point of view.
Right. And back to my first question is, do you help vendors to also comply with laws and regulation, or to move from the informal sector to the formal sector?
We have 2 types of vendors or our business partners. So there would be restaurants that have license, they apply for, food and beverage business license, and that was fine. Right? We can just, that was fine. But then we also have these smaller moms and pops restaurant that just operate, like street food and all that. This part is where it's become tricky. So the way that we have like a hacky solution. So the VAT on our platforms, it charge part of our service only. Say for example, 7% of VAT. Essentially, it have to be the whole food menu, but we only charge 7 of that part of our commission or our business in order to comply as part of our company. But for those vendors, we leave it that way, and they would have to, work with the government or on their side of tax. That's the hacky solution that we did, and probably only exists in Laos out of those 12 markets that foodpanda operate in. So this is one of the challenges. And back to the question previously that there was time last year where the Ministry of Industry and Commerce also invited us in to suggest that all our vendors that sells on foodpanda should register, as part of e-commerce. And I did presented our view on how would this become challenges. I mean, if the process is simple, it's just a simple, checkbox online somewhere where you can just register and get approval easily, then sure thing, it can be done, right? But if, imagine we have 10,000 restaurants on our platforms, and if the ministry want us to be the one who asked or requested all that vendor to register, that is actually very challenging for our business. So we also did presented that view. Yeah, and honestly speaking, I don't know the outcome yet for us, but this is the way that we do as part of the company. We try to comply as much as possible from our side and try to educate our vendors on why it's necessary to have this registration. But we can't be the one who fully push them to register or not.
Do you see some of them moving from being informal to formal? Are there some example of people saying, yes, now thanks to foodpanda, I have grown my business in such a size that I need to register?
Unfortunately, I don't have that data. I would love to say yes, we play a role in that, but we haven't seen that data yet. The number of vendors that fully register still remain quite, stagnant at this point, and those mom and pop is still mom and pop store.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the candid answers. I think now is the time to get questions from both our in-person audience, physical audience, and also online audience. So I'm turning to Amelia to know if we have any new questions from our online participant. Nothing? Nothing. Okay. So back to the room. We have roughly 15 minutes to bombard our speakers with questions, so you can all get your lunch voucher. So, who would like to go first? I'll have the gentleman here, then Lucas, and then finally Dinu. Please tell us who you are.
Good morning. I'm Posai from Department of Import and Export, Ministry of Industry and Commerce. I have a question, not really a question, but maybe something that I would like to share and exchange, especially for Food Panda, Ms. Tanyalat. As you explained about your business management, is very impressive, and you have you contributed to pay tax for the government, which is very impressive. That is what the government want to do. With regard to the e-commerce platform, Food Panda considered as the most successful business, I can say, in comparison to other, business which are ongoing in Laos. I've been involved in many e-commerce platforms, including the PlowsMe, which is very, well known at this moment, and other previous projects, which is, I can say that it is very, hard for the government to support, to continue to support. And the Lao government is very generous. They, borrow the money from the donors, they invested a lot. And coming back to the comments from Deborah, she said that there should not be a big investment from the government, but the business itself have to, take a role, important role in this sector, especially e-commerce platform. So my question to Tanyalat is that whether or not the government should get involved, vigorously in this, sector, because as our presenter already mentioned that e-commerce is very fast and vigorous competition. So somehow the government cannot keep in the pace of competition. Therefore, we should hand over the role to the business people, the community, to do it by itself. So I would like to hear from you whether the government or business should take, lead in this sector. Let's say in the e-commerce, like Food Panda, for example. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I believe from experience working very closely with different sector of the government, right? I totally agree that although the framework or the structure of the regulation is quite complex. So in my view, as a company, a private company, if I want to comply, the challenge is just a lot. That one example of one service and have 3 different licenses is one example. So for me, in my view, maybe because I can't speak this for startup or very small company in Laos, because essentially Food Panda is foreign investor. So we understand very well in terms of role as being compliant to government. But my opinion would be it should be a very favorable environment for business to thrive, not to be an obstacle for business to thrive. So in that sense, yes, government should take place and responsibility in create a favorable business environment. So where the rule and regulation is unclear, then you should be flexible enough for us to continue our service rather than stopping the service. So this is probably more on my point of view as part of the business. But if you ask me that should government involve in terms of funding or supporting or educating, then I can't speak for smaller business because, I mean, we are a small business, but I can't speak for startup community, or I can't speak for very, very local business or micro business that the way that LNCCI is working on or supporting on. Yeah.
Thank you. Lucas, you have a question? Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm Lucas from JNC Group. A question to LNCI. Two questions. One, you told us that we have already some payment gateway. As I understand, we have a gateway only through the credit and debit cards. Is there any realistic plans for any e-wallets? Like even we have already like BCL1, even kind of e-wallets, but any other maybe more also international to connect Laos with international gateways, the payment gateways? That was the first question. And the second, today we already received information that the government with some private companies working on an e-commerce platform. But we know from many other markets and a lot of experience, if it's done something as a government, as a one in a country, is very, very inefficient. So why government should also take care about the general regulations, but let just different platforms to appear, to develop, and just compete as a regular market, just under some general framework?
Okay, first question, e-payment system, right? Yeah, just recently, we have within our association, we done a quick survey to support the e-commerce community within our association, and we have found out that BCL can provide international payment settlement through the MasterCard or Visa card. If a foreigner has Visa card, MasterCard, they can pay local e-commerce provider with those cards. And for the QR code system, the central bank now is developing what we call it national standard QR code, because as we see at the moment, any banks, financial service provider have their own QR code, and it's very complicated when you go to the shop and you see which one to scan. But now it's already done in the pilot stage, and soon we will have one QR code for all the shop, only one. And from many different banks, you can pay through that QR code. I'm not sure if I answered your question about international payment gateway. Yeah? Yeah, I think BCL only one at the moment, and the other banks are working on it to do the same thing, that accepting foreign Visa, MasterCard online. Number two, about e-commerce, why government need to be part of that. As based on our discussion and a lot of working with Ministry of Commerce and Industry, I think, because, like I said, the readiness of the Lao SME is still not there. So when we set up Lao.me, it's not just the platform, but also coaching, training, and how to list product online, how to do the export process. And this is not just the platform, but more on the advisory services, consulting services. And, I still believe that Lao SME still needs support from the government in terms of e-commerce, because if you bring in a regional platform like Lazada or Shopee or whatever come to Laos, they will not care about Lao products much. You have to come up to the level that you can compete. But this initiative that we work with Ministry of Industry and Commerce is that to support Lao products. And Lao.me is focused on just products that are made in Laos. How we, from private sector and government sector, work together to be able to promote Lao product, increase more Lao brand and exports, which we really need it, especially during this time of trade deficit. We have lack of hard currencies. Export is very important and encouraging Lao producer to be able to sell. And this is really great opportunities. We are talking about small market for Laos, 7 million people, but now we're talking about 2.2 billion, right? And this is such a great opportunity for a country like Laos to be able to, to deal with this FTA. So that's, my only concern is that I'm not part of this RCEP. There is another vice president that looking after this, but he is not here. So I be able to learn today. And my concern is that, for us to get ready by 2026, right? It seems too long for business. Yeah. And the opportunity is there, how can we grab that opportunities? I want, the government to look at how to speed up the process of that we can be part of this, as soon as possible. 2026 seems a little bit long for me. Okay.
Thank you for your answers. And the session would not be complete without a question from Dinu. You agree with me? So we are going to ask Dinu for his maybe comment or questions. Before that, I'll let Jeremy to take over the flow of the question and answers. Because I have to get outside for a moment, but you are in the safe hands of Jeremy. Please be gentle with him. Thank you.
Please, Dino, go ahead.
Check. I hope this earns me my food coupon. Okay, the thing is, mine is more of a appeal rather than a question. But yeah, I mean, there are a couple of questions also involved in this. So essentially, the whole point of e-commerce is actually to encourage transactions, is to encourage consumers for easy payment, and also to help, yes, with trade and all the stuff like that. What has happened, like a little bit of background from where I come from. I used to work in telecom in India in mobile payment between 2005 to 2010. After that, I left India. I worked in Tanzania, Singapore, Thailand, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia. So I worked in the region in different economies. I worked from least developed economies to highly developed economies. And I've kind of seen the transition of how digital payments, mobile payments, and all this have worked. What I see in the current discussions we are having is there's a lot of complexities. We are trying to jump into fintech, and we're trying to jump into international digital trade and all that, when actually the fundamentals itself is not yet set in place. We are already talking about international digital payment, when within the local economy itself, digital payment is an issue. The way I see this working with governments and working with private companies, yes, I see the government point of view. You're trying to control your taxes, your revenue, your policies, etc., etc., etc. At the same time, businesses are trying to make it easy for consumers. The point is, there are two sets of customers in this. For government, your customers are companies. For companies, your customers are consumers. The government's aim, if they make the policies for companies to operate easier, then companies can adopt policies which easier at a much faster pace and then target customers. So the case which Tanya pointed out with Foodpanda, yes, exactly, completely understand. I hear you on all the issues you have. Instead of having one nationwide policy to govern all their things, going to each and every city and adopting an individual policy for each city. It's great when you're a big company, when you have resources. But what if you're a little guy like us? We are not that big. And imagine going to each city and applying for policies and getting the approvals done. It's very hard to evolve your local small business economy into a middle or large scale economy if these kind of barriers are in place, right? The other point I also wanted to make is the policies when it comes to online payment. Another simple example is you need to have a banking license for companies to actually do payment gateways. Now, for me, if I want to take online payment, I'm a company of like 10 people, man. I can't apply for a banking license. And if I apply for a banking license, then I become a fintech, but I have nothing to do with fintech. I just require online payment, you know? So these kind of policies make it very complicated for little businesses like us to grow. Now, we have people asking Tanya like, oh, how many people have grown into a large business? How are you going to grow into a large business when these kind of restrictions are in place, right? One of the examples which India has done is, India actually has a cutoff when it comes to taxes. If your yearly revenue does not exceed $3,500 or your yearly income does not exceed $3,500, you don't pay taxes, which works out about $230 a month, which is about, I think, about 4 million kip a month. With respect to Laos, of course, that situation can be different. But these are ways of managing your taxes. If governments are taxing based on income, then you wouldn't have to worry about transactions. You wouldn't have to worry about what tariffs are being put into place. It just has to be taxed on income of what businesses are making. And then the respective government body works on that. So my appeal is kind of in the sense that all the government bodies involved over here, like we are talking about, for a simple e-commerce platform, you're talking about getting BOL involved, getting finance ministry, getting ICT, getting all these guys involved, when it should actually be a simple Ministry of Finance controls income taxes made by the businesses. And the businesses work with setting up the policies. It's not that complicated. It's really the first step, which is simple, and then essentially you just build up on that. After that, it gets complicated with respect to further thing. It's more of an appeal, like I said. It's not really a question, and I really hope government bodies takes this into consideration.
Thank you, Dina. As an appeal rather than a question, well, the committee will have to decide about your lunch voucher or not. So we'll decide before the end. We have really run into lunchtime. What is really heartwarming to see, there are so many questions. I know there was a gentleman over there who wanted a question. If it is a very short question, let's make this the final question, and before we end the session.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Benjamin. I'm a business development consultant in Laos, and I also rather have a statement, just as a bit of an opposite to what was said about Laos. I think for Laos it was great that Foodpanda moved in and came, and I think we should continue to encourage other big businesses to join, because I think it will actually help the Lao economy to develop quicker and be more competitive, and also put on the map, because many people don't know us. It will also help Lao products, I think, in the end, even if Lazada joins. So I think we shouldn't be afraid of having other businesses come in, and big businesses come in and show also, it shows that Laos is a great investment opportunity. And this is, I'm sometimes afraid, I hear this often, that we have to first develop our own products and then open up, and I have a complete opposite opinion. So I think we should open up and embrace great businesses who are successful abroad, interested in coming here, and I think we will all benefit from it.
Yes, totally agree. I think in our, within our association, we are encouraging all big techs to come to Laos. And we also talk to Lazada and others, but they still see us as small. When I mentioned the government or still have to support the SME, doesn't mean that we are blocking the big e-commerce player. Okay, thank you.
Maybe I second to the point that Mr. Jeremy just said, right? When we first arrived, like when Foodpanda first arrived, I think we also heard a lot of that kind of comment from, especially that I involve very closely with the startup community, as in, why government allow the big business to kill the smaller one, right? But after 3 years, I've never seen logistic company happening more than during the time that Foodpanda is here. So we actually ignite a lot of competition in the market, and so many local businesses are coming up from that time. Before Foodpanda, there is some small local players, but the competition or even the marketing, digital marketing is not as exciting as when we actually here. So I totally agree with that. So for me, if government ever like have an opinion about have different set of rules for local players and foreign investment, I would see that that's quite a mistake. I would say, you know, treat everybody in a very similar regulation framework, but at different scale. And that would how I would see it in terms of encouraging competition. And to the point earlier that Denu also mentioned, that in fact, when I thought about it, any company, especially Dinu is also part of our partners. Any company that involved with us also have to be compliant, right? You also have to register for VAT and all that. Yes, we haven't seen that at vendors level, but at least for suppliers and anyone that involved with the company as part of the supply chain have to be compliant. So I think that's a key part that we can drive how supplier and smaller business to be compliant with the law if they are dealing with a registered company. Yeah.
Thank you so much. As I say, I know there are many more questions, and I wish we had time to get final comments or feedback, maybe from the government or maybe from Deborah, but we are out of time. We started off this morning, there's an expression in English that a camel is a horse designed by a committee, meaning that you get so many people involved that what could be quite simple, a horse, becomes like the shape of a camel. Perhaps the e-commerce chapter of the RCEP agreement has become a bit of that camel. It hasn't really achieved what it could have done. It's become a lot more complicated. But the good thing, as we heard from Deborah, was that the Lao government does have the options to actually move forward in the way it wants with the commitments. We've heard from the private sector some of the problems that they face, especially the regulatory burdens, the licensing issues, the frequency of the licensing issues. So again, I think a forum like this, in its own little way, hopefully it's become a way to encourage more dialogue, more interaction between the private sector and the government officials. But I think even earlier we heard that potentially more conversation between the public sector, between the government officials. We heard how many ministries, how many agencies are involved in this very complex issue. As Deborah said, I mean, it's because it's so horizontal, so many players are involved. And yesterday we were talking about trading goods, you know, cross-border. There have been customs posts on borders for centuries. This is something that's very new, this whole digital space. It is very complex. Resources to tackle and address these problems are very limited, and many issues need to try to be solved in a way that everyone is happy, which is not easy. On that, I think we have all deserved our lunch, even Dino, who made a comment rather than a question. So as with yesterday, if you were here yesterday, you will receive a lunch token on the way out. The restaurant's MOIC's on the other end of this floor. We'll start again at 1 o'clock. So please be back for 1 o'clock. Can I end up by thanking our speakers for this session, Mr. Van der Maat and Ms. Chalunsuk. thank you for your great insights and a well-deserved round of applause. And also again for our speakers in the session one, so Souchitta and Deborah. So thank you and see you all at 1 o'clock.